This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Hey, business storytellers. How is everyone doing? Today we want to talk about creativity in advertising. You know, we got everybody out there. How do we measure this? How do we do this? How do we performance? But guess what? When it comes to creativity, we still need creativity. In fact, creativity, in my opinion, drives performance. We will see if today's guest disagrees with me on that. A friendly reminder, we are live on Amazon. Everything you see around me, the plans, the sound panels, everything is visible. You can purchase in the carousel on Amazon. And the reason we are there is because James Hurman, today's guest, also has this book out, Future Demand, Why Building Your Brand, why that's so important. So let's find out. Creativity in advertising, how do we make it work? James Hurman helps startups launch, be successful, bring their products to market. James, nice to see you.
Great to see you, Christoph.
Some reason I'm struggling on my fist bump today. That is not that common of a thing for me. But hey, tell me, why are people even talking about creativity in advertising? Why is that even a question? I mean, it's nonsense to me, honestly, to ever challenge that. But I know people do. Why is that?
I think because creativity has historically been something that people, marketers worried about whether agencies were doing it for their own reasons rather than doing it for the good of the business and the effectiveness of the work. Before about 15 years ago, we didn't have a lot of evidence that creativity was definitely more effective or why it was, how it worked, all those sorts of things. And over the past 15 years, there's been kind of a bit of a renaissance in terms of the effectiveness data that's available, the marketing science that's been done, which has really helped us understand with a really great kind of evidence base of large data sets how marketing and advertising work, and specifically within that, what creativity is good for, and how we can kind of harness it to make our work more effective and use it to help us grow sales and market share and profitability and those sorts of things. So we're now in a much better position to be able to say with absolute confidence that creativity does indeed work and does indeed make advertising more effective, and sort of understand some of the nuance of how it works and when to deploy it and those sorts of things.
What's interesting to me is how do we actually know what's working, right? Is it creativity, or is it budget to get the thing in front of people? Or is it a mix, or is it, something completely different? Like I remember some things, I'm this best-selling book, for example, not your book. I'm not talking about your book here in this example, or even my books, but like I read these best-selling books and I'm like, this is total garbage. Like, why is anybody even liking it? Do you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, maybe there's some creativity, but how do we know for sure it's creativity or it's something else? And then like maybe even back up a little bit. What the heck is creativity even in this context?
Yeah. Totally. So, where to start on that question? So, you're right. Advertising effectiveness is a combination of things working together. It's not one thing. It's kind of, we need to get the budget right. We need to get the targeting right. We need to use the right sort of advertising for driving short-term sales, and a different type of advertising for building future demand, building our brand, talking to those people that are going to come into the category later, and kind of warming them up to be more likely to click on our performance marketing when they do come into market. We've got to get that right. We've got to get the things that we do around distinctive assets and branding and kind of how we show up in a recognizable way each time. We've got to use creativity, and then we've got to manage campaign variables like the number of media that we use and the length of time that we leave the campaign in market. All of these things are like ingredients in a cake, if you think about it in that way. If you bake a cake and you have all of the ingredients and you put them in the right measurements, then you'll end up with a good cake. If you leave the sugar out of a cake, if you leave just one ingredient out, you end up with a terrible cake. And so that advertising effectiveness is a bit like that. We need a group of ingredients, and we need to manage all of those to make sure that we end up with the most effective product that we can end up with. And then within that, creativity has a certain sort of effect. So how do we define creativity? I define it as work that is kind of original, it's fresh, it feels kind of new and like not average advertising or advertising that you've seen before. So that's the first kind of creative quality. The second is engagement, is this kind of really engaging consumers, pulling them towards the advertising as opposed to just sort of listing facts and communicating at them. So that's the second thing, kind of ideas that engage us, engage our minds, engage our emotions. And then the third thing is executional craft quality. So bringing an ad to life, crafting it, executing it in a way that really serves the idea well. So that's about great photography and copywriting and great filmmaking skills and all of those sorts of things, which are the executional aspects of creativity. So that's how I sort of define what is more creative work. It's more original, it's more engaging, and it's really well crafted in terms of its execution. And then if we think about the role that creativity plays, so going back, about 12 or 13 years, I wrote, my first book was called The Case for Creativity, and it was all about the evidence that creativity did indeed make advertising more effective. And so there's a ton of research around this, a ton of data, a ton of academic studies which analyze the effects of creativity. And what those studies show is that, firstly, on average, more creative advertising is much more effective from a commercial perspective. So when I say effectiveness, I'm not talking about just like getting clicks and likes and things like that. I'm talking about the hard commercial metrics. Is this driving an increase in sales? Is it driving an increase in market share? Is it helping us, our company, be more profitable? Those sorts of hard commercial metrics are what I mean when I say something's been effective. And how creativity adds to effectiveness. What this sort of studies show is that, firstly, creativity tends to, creative ads stand out more, so they're more likely to gain attention from the market. They stand out more, they attract attention. Secondly, they're more likely to be recalled. They're better at building sort of memory structures or leaving us with a memory that we'll of the brand that we'll access when we come into the market. Thirdly, more creative ads are better at driving fame effects. And what I mean by that is getting shared and getting liked. Getting shared and getting written about in the media. So creating earned impressions and earned media value obviously is something which helps our media budget go further, reach more people, often in a more meaningful way. And then ultimately that sort of adds up to creativity being ultimately more kind of effective. What we've learned in the time subsequent to that, and this was really getting into this sort of principle of future demand, which I'll sort of top line for the audience, so you've got a sort of basic understanding of this principle. It's based around the truth that in any market there are two types of demand. There's what I call existing demand, which is people that are in the market and ready to buy right now. And there's what I call future demand, which is a much larger group of people who aren't in the market right now, but will come into it at some point in future. They're not ready to buy now, but they will be later. And I'll give you an example of this. So when I talk to audiences, I always do this experiment where I say, can you put up your hand if you're currently in the market to buy a new mobile phone, right? So are you going to buy a new phone in the next kind of week or two? And 2 or 3 hands go up. And then I say, put up your hand if you think you'll buy a new mobile phone in the next 2 years. And almost everyone's hand goes up. And that's a demonstration of how in any market, there's a small group of people who are in the market and ready to buy right now. And then there's a much larger group who are not in the market just yet, but will come into it at some point in future. And we need to, as marketers, we've got an important job to do with both of those groups. So obviously with those who are in the market, we want to convert them. We want to make sure that they buy us and not someone else. And then when it comes to that much larger audience of people that will come into the market later, marketer. We have a different job to do, and that's about making our brand familiar to that audience so that when they come into the market, they gravitate towards us, because humans have a familiarity bias. We like to choose things that we're more familiar with, and so if we've made our brand familiar to people before they come into the market, they're much more likely to convert from our performance marketing. Now, what we kind of understand looking at all of the data around the type of creativity that works best for either of those two jobs, for converting the existing demand in the market, actually we want something that's pretty uncreative, pretty straightforward, pretty rational. It is listing out kind of product features and facts and telling people how much the thing costs and where they can get it and calling to action with a click here and a buy now. When we're talking to people who are in the market, all of that information is totally relevant to them. They're making a decision and they want to know about, what we've got to sell. The people who aren't in the market yet don't care about any of that. Right, so they are not in the market. They've got busy lives. They don't care about the features and benefits of products in a category that they're not intending to buy from in the near future. So we need a different type of marketing to talk to those people, and this is where creativity really comes into its own. So for those people that aren't in the market, creativity earns their attention. So even though they're not interested necessarily in the category, if we do something really creative, that will earn their attention anyway, and it'll stand out, it'll engage them, it'll leave them hopefully with a kind of positive memory and a positive feeling about the brand, and we don't want to get them to click here and buy now at that point, because they're not in the category yet. We just want to leave a kind of memory imprint so that when they come into the category later, they're familiar with us. Hopefully they feel emotionally positive towards us, and that's going to make them gravitate towards us and be more likely to respond to our performance marketing in the way that we want them to.
What's interesting to me when we talk about creativity too is like, what's the importance of like knowing your audience and getting it right for them. So for example, State Farm commercials, I love them. I think they're always, most of the time they're athletes, right? So I can relate. I know the athlete. I want to pay attention to the jokes, and they have Caitlin Clark on, and they have all these puns, when it comes to basketball. And then there's another insurance agency, and it's always like, on the shore of, that's probably not the right term, but you can see like the Statue of Liberty behind you in New York City. I don't remember the name now, what it is, but those commercials do not at all speak to me, but I know that they work really, really well for a fact, because I've seen I've heard the studies before, and I've seen the results or whatever. But how do you know that what you're doing is creative for your audience and not necessarily just everybody or the wrong audience?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So we don't necessarily always respond to the stuff that we like, and not respond to the stuff that we don't feel personally connected with. So there's plenty of evidence that there's all sorts of cases where someone really likes an ad for a brand but doesn't necessarily go out and buy the product. And then cases like the second insurer that you were mentioning, that's probably used the same sort of iconic imagery for a really long time, over years or decades, and that builds up a sort of a sense, even though you don't necessarily kind of wildly excited about that from a creative perspective, it is building up a sense of that brand in your mind. You're feeling more familiar with it. It looks the same every time it shows up, and that has an effect on the buying decisions that we make, even though it's not particularly creative or original or interesting or what have you. And so often we I think we maybe over focus on, are we connecting with the audience in a way that reflects them? Are we showing people like them in the ad? And that's not always necessary to do. Firstly, most brands have very broad buying groups. It's not just guys 25 to 30 who live in a particular area. Usually we find most brands, especially big brands, they have every kind of age group, every ethnicity buying from them. So it's very hard to show a single sort of person in that ad that represents that target market in the right way. And then many ads don't represent the target at all. So if you think of the Cadbury ad with the drumming gorilla, right, that drove a lot of sales among people, sales increase among humans, no sales increase among gorillas. So, sometimes we can do something that doesn't necessarily reflect the audience, but the audience finds absolutely compelling and really, a fantastic bit of creativity. And so I think, ultimately, if we're wanting to reach the really high bar, we're looking for work which is pretty universal. So if you think about You're Not You When You're Hungry for Snickers, they've done a ton of different ads with a ton of different sorts of talent in it. And everyone relates to that because we all relate to this kind of, universal human insight that our personality changes when we're hungry. And so really kind of the best creativity takes a universal truth and turns it into something which is a really emotional, original, engaging kind of story. That's kind of the what we should all really be aiming for.
I know you work with startups and helping them get going, get to market and whatnot. What do you see in startups? I mean, are they just chasing the current quarter? Are they really building a long-term brand, or where do startups struggle when it comes to creativity, or where do they excel over other companies?
Yeah. So startups is super interesting. So classically, historically, they've been very short-term focused, and so startups do tend to, particularly in their first couple of years, really over-index on driving immediate sales uptake. And there's been a bit of a myth that's perpetuated that startup companies don't need to do brand building or don't need to do advertising. It should be all about the product, and if you build it, people will come, and all that kind of stuff. In fact, the data doesn't support that. We should be building a brand. When you look at the startup journey from a first seed investment through to an exit, is usually about 10 years on average. So that's a long term. And the job of a founder isn't just to make next quarter's sales look really impressive. It's to build the company so it's the most valuable in 10 years' time when they exit that company. So they really need to be thinking about both the short term and the long term. The short term is really important. If the company falls over, the long term doesn't matter very much, but it's about balancing those two things. And so what startups often do is they convert a lot of the existing demand in their category, but they don't build a lot of future demand. They don't spend time talking to that much broader group of people that are going to come into the market next year and buy from their brand. And that's the job that they need to be doing. And that's why we see a lot of startups kind of, they go great for the first 2 or 3 years, and then their performance starts to plateau out. It becomes harder to find new customers. It's more expensive. Your cost of acquisition goes up, your ROI goes down, and everything becomes a bit hard. And if we want to avoid that, then what we need to be doing is, as we're kind of scaling up our performance, we also need to be scaling up our brand awareness at the same time, and kind of measuring that through tools like Tracksuit, one of my companies, which is a brand health measurement company, particularly for smaller, younger companies, and making sure that we're not only seeing great performance metrics, but we're also growing out the awareness and consideration of our brand over time. So startups have kind of historically not been great at that, but now, as we're starting to better understand how startup brands grow into big, valuable companies, it's becoming really clear that they do need to invest in brand building, in this thing that they might have thought as a bit fluffy or a luxury that they can afford when they're a much bigger company. In fact, that's not true. They become big companies because they do brand building. They don't do brand building because they've become a big company. So it's really, it's becoming, I think, more acceptable and more kind of well understood that even a startup should be creating a brand that is creative from the outset. So it is kind of original and distinctive, and it's got a kind of a feeling to it. It connects emotionally, and it's really well kind of crafted, really well executed. So those same principles for creating an ad are the same for creating a startup's brand. You want to create a brand that's original, feels fresh, feels distinctive, doesn't look like other brands in the category. That's really important. Secondly, is really engaging. It's got a personality. You feel drawn to it. It's got great design. And lastly, it's executed really well. So again, from the design perspective, it looks great. It hangs together well. It's kind of really compelling from, a graphic design or a visual point of view.
It's always an interesting question. Maybe we've had Rob Meyerson on the show talking about, how do you create a great brand? Or, I mean, mostly I guess he focuses on the name of the brand, but how do you determine what the brand should be? And I know we only got like 4 minutes left, but maybe if we can uncover that just a little bit, like how do you even determine what the brand should be, how you should frame it, how you should make it look, and how, to make
Mm.
sure it makes sense too. I mean, I know it's so much easier said than done, but what are your tips?
Yeah, I mean, it really starts with what is the mission that the company's on, right? Your brand should be an externalization of what's absolutely true on the inside of your company. So, whatever that, whether you call it a mission or you call it a purpose or you call it a vision or sort of whatever word you want to use, it's like, what is that thing that you're really trying to do as a company? What are you really trying to achieve in the world? And how do you sort of start to build the brand around that, right? So it's supporting the core mission of the company. So that's how you get to, or how someone like me would help a company get to the sort of essence of what their brand should be about from a strategic point of view. Then the creative bit is really the brand design, and so firstly, you need brand design that really sort of speaks to and supports that essence, that mission that the company's on. So the kind of the personality of the brand aligns with that mission in some way. If you're a brand that's all about kind of, I don't know, if you're, say, a beer brand that's wanting to kind of engage guys in a really humorous way, you're going to design in a different way to if you're a car brand and you want to communicate that your car is a safe car to drive. You're going to design those two brands in quite different ways. And so designing in a way that really supports the essence of the brand, but also designing in a way that's really distinctive, stands out, doesn't look like all the other brands in the category is the other important thing. So there's an art to that, obviously, and very good strategic people and designers are good at sort of, practicing that art and getting a brand out into the world in the right way.
It's certainly kind of it's a fine line on how you make it work and how it doesn't work. I mean, I worked with a brand one time and I said, talk to me about the color of the brand. Why is it the color it is? And they said, because nobody else is using that color in the industry. And I'm thinking, is that actually enough to stand out? Just you have a different color? I mean, who looks at the colors next to each other? Maybe. Now, this color, however, was kind of an aggressive color. And I'm thinking, I don't know. That's why I don't like that color without going into too much detail. It's so aggressive, right? It's in your face. It's those kind of things. Now, in the last 90 seconds here or so, James, tell us, how do people connect with you? Who should reach out to you? Who do you work with? Who can you help the most?
Yeah, so we invest into and work with and support startup companies, mostly based in New Zealand and Australia, but we're happy to work with companies around the world. And we tend to, work best in the early stages of a startup company, so creating their brand in the first place, or maybe they've been going a couple of years and they need a kind of a transformation from maybe what was the quickly thrown together brand that worked for them for the first couple of years, and they want to grow up into a more kind of fully fledged expression of their brand. How to get hold of me? LinkedIn, jameshurman.com, or those are probably the two easiest ways to learn more about me and can connect with me. But yeah, really happy to chat to anyone.
Fantastic. Really glad to connect with you and have you on the show. And we are out.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.